The moment my son looked at the hostess and said, "I'm sorry, she isn't really with us," something inside me broke. I stood there, clutching my old handbag, pretending not to hear the laughter from the next table. I was about to walk out of the restaurant forever, when the owner rushed across the dining room, wrapped me in a warm embrace, and said words that left everyone, including my son, speechless. "Mrs. Evelyn Carter, everything I have exists because of you. If this story touches your heart, I'd love for you to stay with me until the very end. Please like this video if you've ever believed kindness is never wasted. Subscribe if stories about family forgiveness and second chances speak to you. And before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd truly love to know who's sharing this journey with me today. My name is Evelyn Carter, and for most of my life, I believed a mother's love was supposed to be quiet. Not weak, not foolish, just quiet. The kind of love that wakes before sunrise, packs lunches in brown paper bags, presses shirts when everyone else is sleeping, and smiles through exhaustion because a child should never have to know how heavy the world really is. I was 68 years old when my son, Brandon Carter, looked at me in a restaurant full of strangers as if I were a stain on his perfect life. But before I tell you about that night, you need to understand how we got there. Brandon was not born into money. He was born in a small 2-bedroom house outside Columbus, Ohio, during the coldest January I can remember. His father, Robert, held him first. I still remember Robert standing beside my hospital bed, tears caught in his lashes, whispering, "This boy is going to go places, Evie." And I believed him. Back then, we didn't have much. Robert worked maintenance at a manufacturing plant, and I cooked at a little roadside diner called Millie's Corner. It sat off Route 40 with cracked red booths, humming fluorescent lights, and a bell over the door that jingled every time a trucker factory worker or tired mother came in looking for something warm. I started there washing dishes, but Millie quickly found out I could cook. Evelyn, she told me one morning, watching me stir gravy like it was a prayer, "You don't just feed people. You settle something in them." I laughed it off, but deep down, I knew what she meant. Food had always been my language. When I didn't know how to comfort someone, I cooked. When Robert came home with grease under his nails and worry in his eyes, I made chicken and dumplings. When Brandon scraped his knee, I made cinnamon toast. When bills stacked up higher than my courage, I kneaded biscuit dough until my hands stopped shaking. For years, that diner was my second home. I knew regulars by their orders, their troubles, and the way they carried silence. Some people came in hungry for food. Others came in hungry for kindness. I gave both when I could. But to Brandon, as he got older, Millie's Corner became something shameful. When he was little, he loved sitting at the counter after school, swinging his legs, eating fries from a paper basket while doing homework. He would tell everyone, "My mama makes the best meatloaf in Ohio." Then middle school came. Then the nice shoes other kids wore. Then the birthday parties at houses with staircases and finished basements. Then the first time a classmate saw me in my diner uniform smelling like onions, coffee, and fryer oil. That evening, Brandon was quiet at dinner. "What's wrong, baby?" I asked. He pushed peas around his plate and muttered, "Why do you have to work there?" I thought he meant the long hours. So I smiled gently and said, "Because work keeps the lights on." He didn't look at me. "No," he said. "I mean, why can't you do something normal? Normal." That word cut deeper than he knew. Robert heard it too. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth, but he only cleared his throat and said, "There is nothing abnormal about honest work." Brandon's face turned red and he left the table. I told myself it was just age, just embarrassment, just a boy learning the cruel language of status from people who didn't know the cost of survival. But that was the first time I saw it. The distance forming between who I was and who Brandon wanted me to be. When Robert died, that distance became a canyon. It happened suddenly. A heart attack at 51, one phone call, one hospital hallway, one doctor with kind eyes telling me they had done everything they could. Brandon was 16. I remember him standing beside Robert's casket in a borrowed black suit, his face stiff and pale. He didn't cry where anyone could see, not once. After the funeral, people brought casseroles and envelopes with small checks tucked inside sympathy cards. They told me to call if I needed anything. But grief teaches you quickly that most people mean it in the moment, not in the months after. The mortgage still came. The electric bill still came. Brandon's school fees still came. And later college applications came too. I worked double shifts, breakfast at the diner, closing prep at night. Some weeks, I cleaned offices after midnight. My knees ached. My hands cracked from dishwater in winter. But every time I looked at Brandon studying under that dim kitchen light, I saw Robert's face and heard his voice. This boy is going to go places. So I made sure he did. Brandon was brilliant. No one could take that from him. He had a sharp mind, a polished way of speaking, and a hunger that scared me sometimes. He wanted out, not just out of our town, but out of every reminder that he had ever struggled. When he got accepted into Northwestern, he held the letter like it was a ticket to another planet. I screamed. I hugged him. I cried so hard he laughed and told me to stop before I wrinkled the paper. That night, I made his favorite pot roast. He barely ate. He was too busy talking about Chicago law school someday, internships connections, suits, apartments, important people. I listened with pride swelling in my chest, but underneath that pride was fear. Because dreams cost money, more money than I had. Brandon never asked how I managed it. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe I protected him too well. Maybe I made sacrifice look so ordinary that he mistook it for ease. I sold Robert's truck first. Then, my wedding jewelry, except for the simple gold band, I could not bear to part with. I took every catering job I could find. Church banquets, retirement parties, small weddings where the bride's mother counted every dollar. I baked pies until 2 a.m. and delivered trays before my diner shift. And then there was the recipe. The one thing I had created that people talked about for years. A bourbon maple glaze with smoked paprika brown butter and a little apple cider vinegar. I used it on roast chicken at Millie's Corner during fall specials. People came from 3 counties over for that dish. A restaurant group from Cincinnati once offered to buy the rights to it after tasting it at a food festival. At first, I said no. That recipe felt like mine in a world where so little did. But Brandon's tuition deposit was due, so I signed the papers. He never knew. I told him he had received extra aid. I told him God had made a way. I told him not to worry because mothers are very good at turning their own bleeding into bedtime stories. Years passed. Brandon became everything Robert said he would be. Undergraduate honors, law school, a position at a respected firm in Chicago, tailored suits, expensive shoes, a downtown apartment with windows taller than the walls of the house he grew up in. I kept every article, every announcement, every photograph. When he passed the bar exam, I cried in the grocery store parking lot after he called me. "I did it, Mom," he said. I pressed the phone to my ear and whispered, "I always knew you would." For a while, I thought success would soften him. I thought once he felt safe in the world, he would stop running from where he came from. But success did not soften Brandon. It polished him. It made his shame shine brighter. He started correcting my grammar in public. He told me not to call him during work hours unless it was an emergency. He bought me clothes for Christmas that looked more like costumes than gifts, things he thought a mother of a successful man should wear. Once, when I visited his office, I brought homemade peach cobbler for the staff. He smiled tightly and said, "Mom, people don't really do that here." People ate every bite. But I never brought food again. Little by little, I learned to make myself smaller around my own son. I spoke less, asked fewer questions, Wore neutral colors. Pretended questions. Wore neutral colors. Pretended not to notice when he introduced me as my mother Evelyn instead of Mom. Then came Lauren. Brandon told me about her over the phone on a Sunday afternoon. She's sim art mom. Very accomplished. Her family is not to notice when he introduced me as my mother Evelyn instead of Mom. Then came Lauren. Brandon told me about her over the phone on a Sunday afternoon. She's smart mom. Very accomplished. Her family as well, they're different. Different. I knew what he meant. I asked different how. He paused. Just polished. Educated. Social. I looked down at my hands at the burn scar near my thumb from a skillet years ago. That sounds nice, I said. She wants to meet you, he added. My heart lifted before I could stop it. She does. Yes, I made reservations for Friday night. Harbor and Sage. It's one of the best restaurants in the city. I had heard of Harbor and Sage. Even in Ohio, people knew the name. It was the kind of place featured in magazines, the kind of place where plates looked like paintings and a glass of wine cost more than my weekly groceries used to. I'd love that, I said. Another pause. Then Brandon said, Mom, just wear something appropriate, okay? And maybe don't talk too much about the diner. Lauren's family moves in certain circles. There it was again, that quiet request for me to disappear while still showing up. I should have said something. I should have told him I was not an old coat he could hang in the back closet when guests arrived. But I was still his mother. So I swallowed the hurt and said, Of course, honey. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time staring at the phone. Then I went to my closet. I pulled out my best dress navy blue with tiny pearl buttons at the sleeves. It was 10 years old, maybe more, but clean and carefully pressed. I polished my black shoes. I set aside Robert's gold band on its chain, the one I wore under my blouse whenever I needed courage. I wanted that dinner to go well. More than anything, I wanted to believe my son was inviting me into his life, not measuring whether I belonged there. I did not know then that Harbor and Sage was not just a restaurant. I did not know the owner would remember my name. And I certainly did not know that by the end of that night, the son who had spent years trying to bury my past would be forced to stand in front of it. All week, I treated that dinner invitation like a small miracle. At my age, you learn not to expect too much from people, even the ones you raised. Expectations can become sharp little things. They sit inside your chest and cut you quietly every time someone forgets to call, forgets your birthday, forgets that you were once the whole world to them. But when Brandon invited me to Harbor and Sage, I let myself hope. I knew better, but I hoped anyway. For 3 days, I moved through my little house with a kind of nervous energy I had not felt in years. I cleaned rooms no one would see. I washed the good towels. I ironed the navy dress twice, even though there was no one there to tell me whether the sleeves looked right. I stood in front of the mirror and practiced smiling softly, not too wide, because Brandon once told me I looked too emotional in photographs. Too emotional, as if emotion were something dirty on my face. Friday morning, I woke before dawn. The house was silent, except for the furnace clicking on and the old wall clock ticking in the kitchen. I made coffee, but I barely drank it. My stomach was full of butterflies and old memories. I kept thinking about Brandon as a little boy. He used to hold my hand everywhere. At the grocery store, at church, crossing parking lots. Even when his fingers were sticky from candy, he would slip his hand into mine, like it belonged there. Don't let go, Mama, he used to say, and I never did. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe mothers hold on so long that our children start mistaking our grip for a chain. By noon, I had my dress hanging from the closet door. I had polished my shoes until the worn places looked less tired. I had chosen a simple pearl necklace Robert bought me on our 20th anniversary. It was not real pearl, not the kind rich women wore under restaurant chandeliers, but Robert had saved for it, and that made it precious. I touched the necklace and whispered, "Come with me tonight, Robert." Whenever I went somewhere that made me feel small, I wore something that reminded me I had once been deeply loved. Brandon called around 4. "Mom, you still coming?" His voice was quick, distracted with city noise behind him. "Yes, honey, I'm leaving soon." "Good. Reservation is at 7:30. Don't be late." "Okay, Lauren values punctuality." Lauren values punctuality. I looked at the clock, though I had already checked the bus schedule 6 times. "I won't be late." "And Mom," I closed my eyes. "Yes, remember what we talked about. We talked about many things." He sighed. "Just keep things light. Lauren's family is very refined. She's used to a certain kind of conversation." I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed. "What kind of conversation do you think I have, Brandon?" "That's not what I mean." "What do you mean?" Another pause. I could hear him breathing, impatient. "I just don't want you launching into old diner stories, or talking about money struggles, or Dad's death in detail. It can make people uncomfortable." My hand tightened around the phone. My husband's death, my years of work, the diner that fed him, all of it reduced to subjects that might make polished people uncomfortable. "I understand," I said. But I did not understand. Not really. He lowered his voice. "This dinner matters to me. Lauren matters to me. Her father knows people. Her circle could help my career in ways you don't realize." There it was. Not, "I want my mother to meet the woman I love." Not, "I want you two to know each other." This dinner was a doorway, and I was something he needed to carry through it without dropping. "I'll do my best," I said. "Great. And Mom Harbor and Sage is upscale. You don't need to bring anything." I almost laughed. Bring anything. For years, I never visited anyone empty-handed. A pie, a jar of preserves, a loaf of banana bread wrapped in foil. Food was how I entered rooms when I did not know where to place my hands. But I said, "I won't." After the call ended, I sat there for a while, staring at my reflection in the dark television screen across the room. I looked older than I felt in my heart. My hair was silver now, cut short because my shoulders ached too much to fuss with it. The skin around my eyes had folded into fine little lines. My hands, once strong enough to lift cast iron skillets all day, trembled slightly when I was tired. There was a scar near my wrist from a burn I got pulling a tray of biscuits from the oven during a Sunday rush. Brandon saw those things as signs of embarrassment. I saw them as proof I had survived. Still, before I left, I changed my lipstick twice. The drive to Chicago felt longer than usual, even though I had made the trip before. The sky was turning lavender by the time the buildings rose in the distance, glass and steel catching the last light like cold fire. I rode in the back of a rideshare Brandon had ordered for me, my handbag resting on my lap, my fingers folded over it. The young driver glanced at me in the mirror. "Special night," I smiled. "Dinner with my son. That's nice." "Yes," I said, looking out at the city lights. "It is. I wanted it to be true." Harbor and Sage sat on a corner street downtown. All tall windows, warm gold light, and a discreet sign that looked expensive because it did not need to shout. Through the glass, I could see people in dark suits, women with smooth hair, waiters moving like dancers between tables. For a moment, I almost asked the driver to keep going. I thought of Millie's Corner, with its chipped mugs and sugar packets in plastic holders. I thought of laughter rolling from the kitchen bacon grease popping the bell above the door, singing whenever somebody came in from the cold. This place had no bell. Just a heavy glass door and a young hostess in black. I stepped out, carefully smoothing my dress. Inside, the air smelled of browned butter, fresh herbs, and money. Soft jazz drifted from somewhere hidden. The floor shone beneath my shoes. Candles flickered on every table, and the silverware looked like it had never touched ordinary hands. The hostess greeted me with a trained smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, Carter. Brandon Carter." She checked the screen. "Your party has already arrived." My heart gave a foolish little leap. He was here. The hostess led me through the dining room. I saw Brandon before he saw me. He sat near the windows in a charcoal suit, his watch catching the candlelight. Across from him was Lauren. She was beautiful in the careful way some women are when they have never had to rush out of the house with wet hair and unpaid bills. Blonde hair tucked behind one ear. Cream-colored blouse. Small diamond earrings. A posture that said she had been taught never to take up too much space and never to give it away either. When Brandon looked up, his smile appeared for half a second. Then his eyes moved over me. My dress, my shoes, my handbag. The smile tightened. "Mom," he said, standing halfway. I leaned in to hug him, but he gave me his shoulder instead of his chest. A small thing, almost invisible. But a mother feels those things. Lauren stood politely. "Mrs. Carter, it's so nice to finally meet you. Please call me Evelyn." She smiled. "Evelyn, then." Her hand was cool and soft. Mine felt warm and rough around hers. I wondered if she noticed. Brandon pulled out my chair, but not with tenderness. More like duty. As I sat down, he leaned close enough that only I could hear. "You look fine," he whispered. Fine. Not lovely. Not glad you came. Not Mom. I'm happy you're here. Fine. I placed my napkin in my lap and looked at the menu, though the words blurred for a moment. Lauren tried first. "Brandon tells me you live in Ohio." "Yes, in the same little house where he grew up." Brandon gave a short laugh. "It's very modest." I smiled gently. It was always warm. Lauren tilted her head. "That's a lovely way to put it." For a few minutes, I allowed myself to relax. Maybe she was kind. Maybe Brandon was nervous. Maybe this was just awkward in the way first meetings often are. The waiter came explaining dishes with long descriptions. Roasted beet salad with goat cheese foam. Diver scallops with parsnip pure. Duck breast with cherry gastrique. I listened with interest. Cooking language had changed over the years, but food was still food. Heat, fat, salt, timing, care. When the waiter mentioned the duck, I said softly, "Cherry can be tricky with duck, too sweet, and it hides the skin." Brandon's head snapped toward me. The waiter smiled. "Exactly. Chef balances it with sherry vinegar." "That would do it," I said. The waiter studied me for half a second longer than necessary. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition. No, I told myself. Impossible. He was young. Too young to know me. But as he walked away, he glanced back once. Brandon noticed. "Mom," he murmured, "please don't critique the menu." I wasn't critiquing it. It sounded like you were. I was just interested. Lauren looked between us. "Did you cook professionally?" Before I could answer, Brandon cut in. "She worked in food service when I was young." Food service. 2 words that folded 30 years of labor into something small enough for him to tolerate. I looked at my son, waiting for him to correct himself. He did not. So I smiled at Lauren and said, "Yes, something like that. Something like that." The lie tasted bitter, but I swallowed it for his sake. Dinner had not even begun. and already I felt the old lessons settling over me. Be pleasant, be quiet, do not embarrass him, do not be too much. The waiter returned with water, and as he set my glass down, his eyes moved to my face again. "Excuse me," he said carefully. "Have you ever been to Millie's Corner?" My fingers froze around the napkin. Brandon's expression hardened. I gave the waiter a small, almost pleading smile. "A long time ago," I said. He opened his mouth, then seemed to understand something in my eyes. He nodded politely and stepped away, but the air at the table had changed. Brandon's jaw was tight. Lauren looked curious, and I could feel the past, the one my son had tried so hard to bury, pulling up a chair beside us. The waiter's question sat at our table longer than the bread basket. "Have you ever been to Millie's Corner?" It was such a simple question. Harmless, really. But Brandon looked at me as if I had spilled red wine across his future. Lauren's eyes softened with interest. "Millie's Corner?" she asked. "Is that a restaurant?" "It was," I said carefully, "a little diner outside Columbus." Brandon reached for his water glass. "Just an old local place." Just. There are words people use when they want to bury something without seeming cruel. Just old. Just small. Just a diner. Just food service. Just my mother. Lauren glanced at him, then back at me. "Did you go there often?" I folded my hands in my lap. "I worked there for many years." Before Lauren could respond, Brandon smiled that polished courtroom smile of his. "She helped out there when I was younger. You know, small-town jobs. Nothing glamorous." I felt my face grow warm. Helped out. For nearly 30 years, I had opened that diner before the sun had the courage to rise. I had unlocked the back door in winter storms, turned on the griddle, checked the coffee urns, rolled biscuit dough, chopped onions until my eyes burned, and fed half the town through grief, divorce, birthdays, layoffs, and lonely Christmas mornings. But at that table, my life had been reduced to helped out. Lauren studied me as if she sensed something missing. "That must have been hard work," she said. "It was honest work," I replied. Brandon shifted in his chair. "Mom has always been very sentimental about it." I looked down at my napkin. The linen was thick and white, folded into a perfect rectangle. I ran my thumb along the edge, remembering paper napkins at Millie's thin enough to tear if your hands were wet. The first course arrived, small plates arranged so beautifully they almost looked afraid to be eaten. The waiter, the same young man who had asked about the diner, set mine down last. His hands moved with practiced grace, but his eyes flicked toward me again. "Enjoy, Mrs. Carter," he said. I had not given him my last name. I looked up quickly. Brandon noticed that too. "How did you know her name?" he asked. The waiter hesitated. "Is on the reservation?" "No." Brandon said, his voice light but sharp underneath. "The reservation is under my name." A small silence opened. The waiter recovered with a professional nod. "My mistake, sir." Then he walked away. Brandon leaned toward me, lowering his voice. "Did you say something to him?" "No." "Then why is he acting like he knows you?" "I don't know." That was not entirely true. I did not know him, but I knew that look. Recognition has a warmth to it, a little light behind the eyes. I had seen it before in former customers' grown children, people who remembered a plate of food at a time when the world had been unkind to them. But I did not want trouble. I did not want Brandon embarrassed. Isn't that strange? Even while he was ashamed of me, I was still trying to protect him from shame. Lauren lifted her fork. "Evelyn, what did you do at the diner?" I opened my mouth. Brandon answered. "She cooked sometimes, mostly basic comfort food." Something inside me tightened. Sometimes. Basic. I could still hear Millie's voice from years ago. Evelyn, if I could bottle what you put in that gravy, I'd retire by Christmas. I could still see the line outside the diner during the fall festival when people came for my roast chicken with bourbon maple glaze. I could still remember a young local reporter taking pictures of my pies, calling me the heart of Millie's Corner in a Sunday newspaper piece Brandon once cut out for a school project. Back then, he was proud. Back then, he had written in crayon, beneath the picture, "My mom makes people happy." I wondered where that boy had gone. "I cooked," I said quietly before Brandon could shrink me any further. "Breakfast, lunch, dinner specials, pies on Fridays, holiday meals when people had nowhere else to go." Lauren smiled. "That sounds wonderful." Brandon gave a short laugh. "It sounds more charming in memory than it probably was. Grease traps and truckers, right, Mom?" His words were meant to be playful. Anyone listening casually might have thought he was teasing, but I knew the difference between teasing and warning. I looked at him. There were truckers, yes, and widows, nurses coming off night shifts, police officers, single fathers, kids with no lunch money, people who needed a place to sit where nobody rushed them. Lauren's expression changed. She lowered her fork. "That's beautiful," she said. Brandon's mouth tightened. The second course came not long after. I tried to focus on the food, on the delicate sauce beneath the scallops on the crisp edge of something fried and paper thin. But tension had already wrapped itself around the table. Lauren asked about Brandon's childhood. I told her about his science fair volcano exploding red dye all over my kitchen curtains. Brandon interrupted to say he eventually won a regional academic award. I mentioned how he used to read books under the counter at the diner after school. Brandon corrected me and said he mostly studied at the library. I said Robert would have been proud to see him now. Brandon's eyes flashed and he quickly asked Lauren about her father's charity board. Every time I reached for something real, Brandon placed something polished over it. I began to understand the shape of the evening. He had not invited me to be known. He had invited me to behave. Lauren, to her credit, kept trying to include me. She asked gentle questions. She listened. But Brandon kept steering the conversation toward his work, his cases, his connections, his plans. His voice changed when he spoke about himself, stronger, smoother, richer somehow. Then the duck arrived. It was plated beautifully, the skin shining beneath the candlelight cherries arranged beside it like little jewels. I took one bite and immediately knew something was off. Not terrible, not ruined. But the sauce had split slightly. The butter had separated from the reduction, leaving a glossy oil at the edge of the plate. Old habits rose in me before caution could stop them. I set my fork down and murmured mostly to myself. The heat was a little too high when they mounted the butter. Brandon froze. Lauren looked at my plate. "What does that mean?" "It's nothing," I said quickly, but she seemed genuinely curious. "No, really." I smiled faintly. When a sauce is finished with butter, you have to keep the heat gentle. Too hot, and it breaks. It still tastes fine, but it breaks. It still tastes fine, but it loses that smoothness. Lauren tasted hers, then looked surprised. "I see what you mean." Brandon's face darkened. "Mom," he said. I turned to him. "That's enough." His tone was low, but there was steel in it. "I wasn't complaining. It's that smoothness." Lauren tasted hers, then looked surprised. "I see what you mean." Brandon's face darkened. "Mom," he said. I turned to him. "That's enough." His tone was low, but there was steel in it. "I wasn't complaining. You're picking apart the food in one of the best restaurants in Chicago." I made a small observation. "You always do this." I blinked. "Always do what act like you know more than everyone else because you spent years in some diner kitchen." The words landed hard enough to make my breath catch. Lauren sat still. At the next table, a woman glanced over. I felt heat rise from my neck to my cheeks. Brandon, please. No, I'm serious. His smile returned, but now it was thin and embarrassed. This is exactly what I asked you not to do. My fingers trembled around the stem of my water glass. Lauren said softly, Brandon? She wasn't being rude. He ignored her. You don't have to prove anything, Mom. Nobody expects you to understand this kind of dining. This kind of dining. I looked down at my plate, at the sauce slowly separating under the warm light. A small mistake. Correctable. Human. Unlike the mistake my son was making in front of me. I wasn't trying to prove anything I said, but my voice sounded tired even to myself. The waiter returned to check on us, and Brandon immediately lifted his chin. Everything is fine, he said too brightly. My mother just has opinions. The waiter looked at me, not him. Is something wrong with the duck, Mom? I shook my head. No, sweetheart. It's lovely. That word slipped out, sweetheart. The kind of word I used with young servers, tired cashiers, strangers who looked like they needed softness. The waiter's eyes warmed. Then from somewhere near the kitchen entrance, another man in a white chef's coat appeared. He was older than the waiter with a shaved head and a serious expression. He looked toward our table, then whispered something to a server beside him. The server looked at me. Then both of them disappeared through the swinging kitchen door. Brandon saw it. His jaw clenched. What did you do now? He whispered. The question hurt more than it should have. Not, are you okay? Not, did I upset you? What did you do? Now, I placed my napkin beside my plate and sat back. For the first time that evening, I stopped trying to smooth the air for him. I ate dinner, I said quietly. That is all. Lauren looked at me with something like sympathy, but Brandon was no longer listening. His eyes kept moving toward the kitchen, where the door had opened once twice, and where faces were beginning to look out, not with irritation, not with mockery, but with a kind of startled respect I had not felt in years. And I knew then, deep in my bones, that the past had not merely pulled up a chair beside us. It had walked into the kitchen and said my name. For a moment, I thought the evening might still be saved. That is what mothers do even when the table is already cracking beneath the weight of humiliation. We look for the one soft place left. A kind glance, a change of subject, a sip of water. Anything that lets us pretend the hurt did not happen loudly enough to matter. So I lifted my fork again. I cut a small piece of duck, dipped it carefully into the broken sauce, and placed it in my mouth as if nothing had changed. I chewed slowly. I swallowed with dignity. I even nodded toward Lauren. It is very good, I said. Lauren looked relieved, but Brandon did not. He sat back in his chair, one hand resting near his wine glass. His face arranged into that tight expression I had come to recognize. It was the face he used when he believed someone had lowered his value by standing too close to him. I just don't understand why you had to say anything, he murmured. I kept my voice soft. Because Lauren asked. She asked because you made a comment. I made a comment about sauce, Brandon. Not about your character. His eyes sharpened. Lauren placed her fork down. Maybe we should just move on. Yes, I said quickly. That would be best. But Brandon laughed under his breath, and that little laugh hurt worse than if he had shouted. It was dismissive, embarrassed, almost cruel. You always do that, he said. I looked at him. Do what? Act innocent after making things awkward? The table beside us went quieter. I felt it before I saw it. The way strangers begin pretending not to listen while listening to every word. My hands grew cold. Brandon, I whispered. Please don't do this here. There it is, he said. Now I'm the bad guy because I don't want my mother critiquing a Michelin-level restaurant like she's still standing over a griddle in Ohio. Lauren's eyes widened. Brandon! He ignored her again. The words Michelin level floated in the air like something he had purchased and needed everyone to admire. I wondered if he even knew what made food worthy. Not the price, not the lighting, not the distance between tables. Food became worthy when someone cared enough not to rush it. But I said none of that. I only reached for my water. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the glass. A few drops spilled onto the white tablecloth. Not much. Just enough. Brandon stared at the small wet mark as if it confirmed every fear he had about me. Mom, he said through clenched teeth. I'm sorry. I reached for my napkin, but he snatched his own and pressed it over the water before I could move. It's fine, he said loudly, too loudly. Everything is fine. Lauren leaned closer to me. Evelyn, are you okay? I smiled because pride is sometimes the last coat a woman has to keep herself warm. I'm fine, dear. But I was not fine. My chest felt tight. My throat burned. I could feel every eye, every candle, every polished glass, every silent judgment that may or may not have been real. At 68 years old, I had buried a husband, raised a child alone, worked until my bones ached, and survived months when I had to choose between paying the heating bill or buying meat. Yet somehow, sitting across from my own son, I felt like a little girl who had worn the wrong shoes to school. The waiter approached again, cautious now. Can I bring anything else for the table? Brandon looked up with a bright, professional smile. No, thank you. We're perfectly fine. The waiter glanced at me. Ma'am, I shook my head. No, thank you. He hesitated, and again I saw recognition flickering behind his eyes. Not full certainty, but something close. His gaze moved toward the kitchen door, where shadows shifted behind the small glass window. Brandon saw him looking. Is there a problem? Brandon asked. No, sir. Then why does your staff keep staring at our table? The waiter straightened. I apologize if it seemed that way. It does seem that way. Brandon Lauren said, her voice lower now, warning him. But pride once wounded can become hungry. And my son's pride had been starving for years. He looked at me and gave a smile that did not reach his eyes. Maybe they're just impressed, he said. Apparently, my mother has decided to educate the kitchen tonight. I felt something break open inside me. Not anger, exactly, but exhaustion. The kind that comes when you finally realize someone is not misunderstanding you. They are choosing not to see you. I set my fork down. I think I should go. Lauren turned toward me. No, please don't. Brandon looked startled, but only for a second. Mom, don't be dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. You're doing exactly what I said you would do. I pushed my chair back carefully, trying not to make noise. I came because you invited me. I came because I wanted to meet Lauren. I came because I thought maybe tonight meant something. It does mean something, he snapped. That's why I needed you to act normal. The word struck the table like a thrown plate. Normal. There it was again after all those years. The same word from a boy at our dinner table, now dressed in an expensive suit and sharpened into a man's contempt. Lauren whispered, Brandon, stop. But he did not stop. He leaned forward, his voice low but carrying just far enough for the neighboring tables to hear. You don't belong in places like this, Mom. And when you try to pretend you do, it embarrasses me. The room seemed to tilt. For a few seconds, I could not breathe, not because I believed him, because part of me feared he had believed it for a long time. The woman at the next table looked down at her plate. A man near the window lifted his eyebrows and then looked away. The waiter froze beside us. Somewhere behind me, silverware touched porcelain with a tiny, cruel sound. I stood slowly. My knees ached, but they held me. I looked at Brandon, my son, my baby, the child I had carried through fever nights, the young man whose tuition I had paid, with pieces of my life he never bothered to count. "Then I won't embarrass you any longer," I said. His face changed slightly. Not regret, not yet. More like panic that the scene had slipped beyond his control. "Mom, sit down." "No, people are watching." I almost laughed, but my heart hurt too much. "Yes," I said. "They are." Lauren stood too. "Evelyn, please let me call you a car. That's kind of you, but I can manage." I picked up my handbag. The clasp stuck for a moment because my hands were shaking. I hated that. I hated that my body betrayed me when my spirit was trying so hard to stand tall. Then a voice came from behind me. Mrs. Carter, not Brandon's voice, not Lauren's. The waiter's. I turned. He stood near the aisle, pale with nerves, as if he had just decided to do something that might cost him his job. "Yes," I said. He swallowed. "Would you mind waiting just one moment?" Brandon exhaled sharply. "For what?" The waiter did not answer him. His eyes stayed on me. "Please," he said. "Someone would like to speak with you." The kitchen door opened then. A man in a crisp white chef's coat stepped out, the same one who had been watching earlier. Behind him, I could see two other kitchen staff peering through the doorway. The chef walked toward us with careful steps, his expression no longer uncertain. He stopped a few feet away from me. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm sorry to disturb you. Did you say your name was Evelyn Carter?" Brandon gave a humorless laugh. "This is ridiculous." I felt my heartbeat in my ears. "Yes," I answered. "That's my name." The chef's face changed. The seriousness softened into something like awe. He looked back toward the kitchen and nodded once. The waiter disappeared quickly through the door. Brandon stood now, his chair scraping the floor. "What is going on?" he demanded. The chef finally looked at him. "Sir," he said evenly, "I think you may want to lower your voice." Brandon's mouth opened, shocked that anyone in this restaurant would correct him. Before he could respond, the dining room shifted again. From the far side of the room, near the private dining area, a tall man in a dark suit began walking toward us. He moved with the calm authority of someone everyone recognized. Conversations dimmed as he passed. Servers stepped aside. Even the hostess near the front turned her head. I knew his face from magazines I had seen in waiting rooms and newspaper articles folded beside coffee cups. Marcus Bennett, owner of Harbor and Sage, a man people called one of the most respected restaurateurs in Chicago. He walked straight toward me. Not toward Brandon, not toward Lauren, toward me. For one strange second, the room became silent enough for me to hear my own breath. Marcus stopped in front of me, his eyes shining with recognition, so certain it left no room for doubt. Then he did something that made Brandon's face go completely still. He bowed his head. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have been waiting 25 years to thank you properly." For one breath, no one moved. Marcus Bennett stood in front of me with his head slightly bowed, as though I were not an old woman in a navy dress clutching a worn handbag, but someone important, someone expected, someone remembered. I stared at him, trying to place the man before me beside the boy I suddenly saw in my mind. Thin shoulders, dark eyes, a winter coat too light for Ohio snow. A teenage boy sitting in the last booth at Millie's Corner, pretending to read a newspaper, so no one would notice he had no money to order. My hand flew to my chest. "Marcus," I whispered. His face broke into a smile so tender it nearly undid me. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "It's me." The dining room seemed to hold its breath. Brandon looked between us, his mouth open, his confidence draining from him in visible pieces. Lauren stood beside her chair, one hand pressed lightly against the table. Her eyes had gone wide, not with embarrassment, but with astonishment. "You two know each other?" Lauren stood beside her chair, one hand pressed lightly against the table. Her eyes had gone wide, not with embarrassment, but with astonishment. "You two know each other?" she asked softly. Marcus turned toward her with quiet pride. "I know Mrs. Carter because she saved my life." A murmur passed through the nearby tables. Brandon made a sharp sound. "Saved your life? I'm sorry, but that seems a little dramatic." Marcus looked at my son then. Really looked at him. Not with anger, but with the kind of calm disappointment that can make a man feel smaller than shouting ever could. "Mr. Carter," he said, "there are people in this world whose kindness becomes the reason someone survives long enough to become anything at all. Your mother was that person for me." My legs felt weak. I gripped the back of my chair. "Marcus, you don't have to do this," I said. "Yes, I do," he answered. "I should have done it years ago." The chef in the white coat had stepped closer now. Several servers stood near the kitchen entrance, trying to look professional while clearly listening. The young waiter who had recognized me stood behind Marcus' eyes bright with emotion. Brandon's face flushed red. "This is a private dinner," he said stiffly. "I don't know why the entire restaurant staff is involved." Marcus did not flinch. It became my concern when one of my chefs told me Evelyn Carter was sitting in my dining room being spoken to as if she had no value. The words landed with quiet force. Brandon's eyes darted toward the tables around us. Lauren looked down. I felt shame rise in me not for myself, but for him. A mother's heart is strange that way. Even when a child wounds us, part of us still wants to shield them from the consequences of their own cruelty. "Please," I said gently, "let's not make a scene." Marcus turned back to me, his expression softening. "Mrs. Carter, you spent half your life making room for people who had nowhere to sit. Let someone make room for you tonight." My throat tightened. That was when he opened his arms. Not too suddenly, not assuming, just offering. I stepped forward, and he embraced me like a son might embrace a mother he had been searching for across decades. His suit smelled faintly of cedar and kitchen smoke. I felt the strength of him now, the success the man he had become, but beneath it all, I could still feel that hungry boy from the corner booth. The room blurred. "Oh, Marcus," I whispered, "look at you." He pulled back, smiling through tears. "I tried to make you proud. You did more than that." Brandon shifted behind me. "Mom, what is this?" I turned slowly. His voice was no longer sharp. It was confused now, a little frightened. Not because he was worried about me, I don't think, but because the story he had told himself about me had started cracking in front of witnesses. Marcus answered before I could. "When I was 17, he said, I lived out of a backpack for almost 4 months." Lauren's hand moved to her mouth. "I had left home. My mother was gone. My stepfather was violent. I came to Millie's Corner because it was warm and because the coffee was cheap. I used to order 1 cup and sit there for hours. Most places would have thrown me out." He looked at me. Mrs. Carter never did. Memory opened like a door. I saw him clearly now. Marcus with hollow cheeks. Marcus counting coins under the table. Marcus pretending he wasn't hungry when the smell of meatloaf and gravy filled the diner. "You were so thin," I said. He laughed softly. "I was starving. I knew." "Yes," he said. "You knew before I admitted it." The young waiter wiped quickly at one eye. Marcus continued, his voice steady enough for the room to hear without sounding like a performance. "The first time she fed me, she said the kitchen had made an extra plate by mistake. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and cornbread." I closed my eyes. "I said that a lot," I murmured. "You said it every Tuesday and Thursday for almost a month." A few people chuckled gently, but I felt tears slide down my cheeks. "I didn't want to embarrass you," I said. Marcus nodded. "Exactly. That was the first thing you taught me. Charity without dignity can still wound a person. You never made me feel small." Behind me, Brandon was silent. Marcus looked toward him again. "Your mother gave me food, yes, but she also gave me work. She taught me how to hold a knife properly, how to season in layers, how to clean as I cooked, how to show up on time even when my heart was broken. She told me a kitchen could be a place of discipline, not chaos." The chef beside him nodded. "Chef Marcus tells that story all the time." I blinked. "He does." Marcus smiled. "My staff probably knows your name better than some of my investors do." A soft ripple of warmth moved through the room. Brandon's face tightened again, but this time not with anger, with discomfort, with the dawning realization that he was standing outside a part of my life he had never bothered to enter. Lauren looked at me differently now, not as Brandon's aging mother, as a woman with a history, a woman with gravity. I saw it, and something inside me stood a little taller. Marcus gestured gently toward the kitchen. "The chef who came out earlier is David Alvarez. He trained under me for 10 years. When he heard you mention the butter breaking in the sauce, he asked who you were. Then Tyler here," he nodded toward the young waiter, "said you looked like the woman in an old photo I keep in my office." I frowned. "A photo?" Marcus laughed softly. "You and me outside Millie's corner. You were wearing a red apron. I was holding the first pie I ever baked without burning the crust." The memory made me smile through tears. "You were so proud of that pie." "It was terrible." "It was not terrible. Mrs. Carter, it was leaning sideways. It still tasted good." Marcus shook his head, laughing now. "That right there. That is exactly how you kept people alive. You found the part worth praising." The dining room was no longer pretending not to listen. People had turned toward us openly now, but the feeling had changed. It was not mockery. It was reverence, curiosity, tenderness. And Brandon, who had cared so much about appearances, now had to stand inside the appearance he had created. A son, ashamed of the very woman others honored. He cleared his throat. "Well," he said, forcing a smile, "that's a nice story. Mom never mentioned it." I looked at him. "No," I said quietly. "I didn't. Why not?" The question almost broke my heart. Because when would I have told you, Brandon? Between the calls you rushed through. During visits when you checked your watch. After you told me not to talk about the diner. But I did not say those things. Marcus did. Maybe he said, because your mother does not seem to be the kind of woman who uses kindness as proof of superiority. Brandon's jaw flexed. Lauren turned to him, her voice soft but firm. "Brandon, did you know any of this?" "No," he said. "Obviously not." But his tone carried blame, as if my quietness had deceived him. I looked at my son, and for the first time that night, I did not rush to rescue him. Marcus turned back to me. Mrs. Carter, I would be honored if you would allow me to prepare something for you personally tonight. Not as a guest, as family. My lips parted. Marcus, I couldn't possibly. You can, he said. And you will if you don't mind an old student trying to get it right. The chef smiled. The waiter stepped aside. Lauren's eyes shone. And Brandon stood frozen, watching as the owner of one of the finest restaurants in Chicago treated the woman he had just called embarrassing, like the most important person in the room. Marcus offered me his arm. I looked at it, then at my son. For years, I had made myself small so Brandon could feel tall. But tonight, someone had opened a door back to the woman I had been before shame taught me to whisper. I placed my hand on Marcus's arm, and the dining room softly at first began to clap. The applause was not loud at first. It began with one table near the window, a gentle tapping of palms that sounded almost uncertain, as if people were asking permission to honor what they had just witnessed. Then another table joined, then another. Soon the sound moved through harbor and sage like rain beginning softly on a roof. I had never been applauded in a restaurant before. I had been thanked, of course, tipped sometimes, hugged by tired mothers, blessed by old men after Sunday breakfast. I had heard truckers call back, "Best biscuits in Ohio, Evie," as they pushed through the door into the cold. But applause? In a place like that, no. My first instinct was to shrink from it. I lowered my eyes, embarrassed by the attention. My hand rested lightly on Marcus's arm, but my fingers trembled. He must have felt it because he covered my hand with his own and whispered, "Stand still, Mrs. Carter. Just this once. Let it reach you." Let it reach you. Those words nearly broke me, because for so many years I had been good at letting pain reach me. Bills, loneliness, Brandon's distance, the quiet disrespect that came wrapped in polite suggestions. I had let all of that enter and settle in places I never showed anyone. But praise, love, recognition. Those things I had learned to turn away before they could make me need too much. I lifted my head. Across the table, Brandon stood frozen, his face red beneath the warm restaurant lights. His eyes moved around the room, calculating embarrassed, trapped. For once, he was not controlling the story. For once, the room had chosen a truth he did not authorize. Lauren was still standing too, but her expression had changed completely. She looked at me with something open and wounded, as if my son's cruelty had revealed something to her that she could not unsee. Marcus guided me a few steps away from the table, but I stopped. "Wait," I said softly. He looked down at me. Of course. I turned back to Brandon. Even then, some foolish motherly part of me wanted to offer him a bridge. I did not want the room to swallow him whole. I knew what humiliation felt like. I had no appetite to feed it to anyone else, not even the son who had just served it to me. "Brandon," I said. He straightened quickly, grateful perhaps to be addressed. Perhaps hoping I would smooth things over the way I always had. "Yes. You may come if you want to hear the story." His eyes flickered. "The story," I nodded. "The one you never asked about." The words were not cruel. I did not sharpen them. But I watched them land, and I knew they cut. Lauren stepped around her chair. "I'd like to hear it." Brandon looked at her startled. She did not look away from me. Marcus gestured toward a quieter alcove near the kitchen entrance, not fully private, but away from the center of the room. "We can sit there." "No," I said, surprising myself. "If you're going to tell it, Marcus, tell it where we are." His eyebrows lifted slightly. I drew a slow breath. I spent too many years treating my own life like something that needed to be hidden in a back room. Marcus's eyes softened. Then we tell it here. A server pulled an extra chair near our table. Marcus did not sit immediately. He stood beside me, one hand resting on the back of the chair, and began speaking to the room. Not loudly, not theatrically, but with the ease of a man accustomed to people listening. When I first came into Millie's corner, he said I was 17 and angry at the world. I had nothing in my pocket but change and a bus schedule. I thought hunger was something I could hide if I kept my face still. He smiled faintly. Mrs. Carter saw through me in about 5 minutes. I remembered that day. It had been snowing hard one of those Ohio afternoons when the sky turned the color of dirty wool. The lunch rush had ended, and I was wiping down the counter when the bell over the door jingled. Marcus came in with snow on his shoulders and shoes that were splitting at the seams. He sat in the last booth, the one near the heat vent. Not near the counter, not near people. People who are ashamed of needing help always choose corners. He ordered coffee, I said quietly. Marcus nodded. Coffee I could barely afford. You kept refilling it with hot water when you thought I wasn't looking. A few people smiled. Marcus laughed under his breath. I thought I was clever. You were hungry. He looked at me, and the smile faded into gratitude. Yes, ma'am, I was. The room stilled again. I remembered placing that first plate in front of him. Meatloaf, potatoes, green beans, cornbread, and a slice of apple pie I had cut too generously. He had looked at it like I had set down gold. He had said, I didn't order this. And I had said, kitchen made extra. Happens all the time. It did not happen all the time. Marcus told them that part too. She lied to protect my pride, he said. And when I tried to refuse, she told me food didn't like being wasted. I could hear my younger self saying it. Well, I said now food doesn't. Soft laughter moved through the room. Brandon looked down at the floor. Lauren pulled out a chair and sat slowly listening with both hands folded in her lap. Marcus continued. After a few weeks, Mrs. Carter offered me work. Not charity, work. She told Millie the diner needed someone to carry delivery sweet peel potatoes, anything useful. But the first real thing she taught me was how to make stock. I smiled. You were impatient. I was terrible. You kept boiling it. I thought faster meant better. That is because you were young. He looked around the restaurant. She told me flavor comes from patience. Rush it and all you get is cloudy water. The chef? David nodded from nearby. Chef says that constantly. Marcus grinned, because it's still true. Then his expression grew more serious. She taught me recipes, yes. But more than that, she taught me discipline. She taught me that a kitchen is a place where broken people can learn order. She taught me that feeding someone is not beneath anyone. Those words slipped directly into the place Brandon had wounded. Feeding someone is not beneath anyone. I saw Lauren glance at him. Marcus turned slightly toward Brandon, not accusing, but not sparing him either. When I wanted to quit, she wouldn't let me. When I burned biscuits, she made me start over. When I came in late, she sent me home without pay and told me compassion was not the same as lowering standards. I laughed softly. I did do that. You did. I was furious. You came back on time after that. Yes, ma'am. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a rough edge. One night, I told her I didn't see the point. I said people like me didn't become anything. She gave me a notebook. My breath caught. I had forgotten the notebook. Or maybe I had tucked it away because remembering all the people I had tried to help was sometimes too heavy. Marcus looked at the young waiter. Tyler, would you bring it? The waiter hurried toward the back. Brandon's head lifted. Bring what Marcus did not answer immediately. A minute later, Tyler returned, holding a worn black notebook, sealed inside a clear protective sleeve. Its corners were bent. The cover had faded. A strip of masking tape across the front read, Marcus B. Practice recipes. I covered my mouth. You kept it. Marcus took it gently. It is in my office safe. Marcus. You wrote the first page. He opened the sleeve carefully and displayed the notebook, not passing it around, but holding it where we could see. On the first page in handwriting, I recognized as my own, were words I had written more than 25 years before. Marcus, start with what you can make today. One good plate can become a life if you respect it. On the first page in handwriting I recognized as my own were words I had written more than 25 years before. Marcus, start with what you can make today. One good plate can become a life if you respect it. E.C. The room blurred again. I had no memory of writing those exact words. To me, it had probably been one small note on one busy night. To him, it had been something else entirely. That note, Marcus said, was the first time anyone told me my future could begin with something small and still matter. Lauren wiped her cheek. Brandon looked at the notebook as if it were evidence in a case he had not prepared for. And in a way, it was. Evidence that his mother had not been small. Evidence that he had mistaken humility for emptiness. Marcus turned a page. There are recipes here that began at Millie's Corner. The chicken glaze, the buttermilk brine, the apple onion dressing. I changed them over the years, refined them, built on them. But the foundation was hers. I shook my head. You did the work. You gave me the foundation. Then he looked directly at Brandon. And your mother never asked for credit. The silence after that was heavy. Brandon swallowed. I didn't know. His voice sounded smaller now. I looked at him, and my heart twisted. No, I said, gently. You didn't. For a second, I thought he might apologize. I saw something move across his face, shame maybe, grief maybe, the first crack of understanding. But pride is often the last wall to fall. He looked away and said, Well, she never told me. Lauren closed her eyes briefly, as if the words disappointed her more than she wanted to show. Marcus's expression hardened just enough. Some people shouldn't have to list their sacrifices to be treated with respect. The room went still, and my son, who had always known how to answer judges, partners, professors, and wealthy men, had no answer at all. Brandon's silence lasted only a few seconds, but I could feel him building a wall behind his eyes. That was what he did whenever truth came too close. He did not crumble. He reorganized. He searched for a cleaner version of himself to present to the room. I had watched him do it since he was a teenager, when he broke something, when he lied about where he had been, when he came home ashamed because some rich boy at school had laughed at his shoes. He would straighten his back, smooth his voice, and try to make the facts sound less dangerous. Now he stood in the dining room of Harbor and Sage, surrounded by strangers who had just heard the owner call his mother a mentor, and I saw him reaching for that old defense. He gave a small, careful laugh. Well, he said, this has been very touching. Honestly. I'm glad my mother was kind to you, Marcus. The way he said Marcus, so familiar, so equal, made Lauren look at him sharply. Brandon continued. But I think there may be some exaggeration here. My mother is a sweet woman, but she has always been humble. She probably helped a lot of people in small ways. Small ways. There it was again. A new box for me. Not embarrassing now because that word had failed him. Now I was sweet, humble, small. Marcus's expression did not change, but the room cooled around his silence. I touched his sleeve gently. It's all right. He looked at me. No, Mrs. Carter, it isn't. Brandon's face tightened. I didn't mean any disrespect. Respect, Marcus said quietly. is not only about what you claim to mean, it is also about what you are willing to acknowledge. Brandon's eyes flicked toward Lauren, then the nearest table. I acknowledge she was kind to you. I just don't think we need to turn a family dinner into a public ceremony. Lauren spoke for the first time in several minutes. Brandon, you were the one who made it public. His jaw clenched. I was trying to prevent a scene. No, she said softly. You were trying to prevent people from seeing her. The words fell with a sadness that hurt more than anger. I watched Brandon absorb them. For a moment, his face went blank. Then he turned to me. Mom, can we please sit down and finish dinner? It sounded almost reasonable, almost like peace. But the problem with peace offered too late is that sometimes it is only silence wearing a clean shirt. Before I could answer, Marcus nodded toward Tyler, the young waiter. Tyler hurried toward the back again, and Marcus turned to the room. I do not wish to embarrass anyone. Before I could answer, Marcus nodded toward Tyler, the young waiter. Tyler hurried toward the back again, and Marcus turned to the room. I do not wish to embarrass anyone, he said, but I will not allow Mrs. Carter's work to be minimized in my restaurant. Brandon gave a strained smile. Her work? Yes, Marcus said, her work. Tyler returned, carrying a leather portfolio, deep brown and worn at the edges. Marcus opened it carefully on the table beside the protected notebook. Inside were photographs, old ones, newspaper clippings, a folded menu from Millie's Corner yellowed with age. My breath caught when I saw the first photo. There I was, younger by decades, standing outside the diner in a red apron with flour on one cheek. Beside me stood Marcus, awkward and skinny, holding a crooked apple pie like it was a newborn baby. Behind us, the old sign read, Millie's Corner. Hot coffee, good food, no strangers. I had forgotten that sign. No strangers. That had been Millie's rule. Marcus lifted the photo slightly. This hung in the hallway of my first restaurant. It hangs in my office now. Brandon stared at it. Lauren leaned closer. Evelyn, you look beautiful. I laughed softly through the ache. I look tired. You look alive, she said. That made me look at her. There are compliments that polish you from the outside and compliments that reach into a dark corner and light a lamp. Lauren's did the second. Marcus laid out another clipping. It was from an old Columbus paper. The headline read, Local Diner. Cook brings county-wide crowds with fall chicken special. I remembered that reporter, now a young woman with red glasses, who had asked too many questions during a lunch rush. I had been irritated because the gravy was running low and the fryer was acting up. Brandon's eyes moved over the article. His lips parted slightly. That's you? He said. I nodded. Yes. You never showed me this. I almost smiled. You used it for a school project in 4th grade. His brows pulled together. You did, I said, gently. You glued it to blue construction paper and wrote, My mom feeds everybody. Lauren looked at him. Brandon blinked, and for a second I saw something younger beneath his face. A boy at the kitchen table with a glue stick. A boy proud of me before the world taught him pride could be expensive. I don't remember that, he said. No, I whispered. I suppose you don't. Marcus turned another page. This, he said, tapping a typed letter, is from the culinary program in Cincinnati that accepted me after Mrs. Carter helped me apply. Brandon's voice sharpened, maybe because evidence frightened him more than memory. She helped you apply, Marcus smiled faintly. I didn't know how. I had no permanent address, no family support, no idea how to write a personal statement. Your mother sat with me after closing for 2 weeks. She made coffee, corrected my grammar, and told me not to apologize for wanting more. I looked down. I remember you hated the essay. I hated needing one. You wrote 5 drafts, and you made me write a 6th, because the 5th one still sounded angry. It was angry. You needed it to sound honest. Marcus looked at the room. She was right. Brandon reached for the clipping, but stopped before touching it, as if the paper might burn him. And this? You needed it to sound honest. Marcus looked at the room. She was right. Brandon reached for the clipping, but stopped before touching it, as if the paper might burn him. And this? He asked, pointing to a letter with a culinary school seal. My acceptance, Marcus said. And this? He lifted another sheet. This is the note she packed into my bag when I left Ohio. I closed my eyes. He read it aloud, but only a small part. Remember, Marcus never confuse where you start with what you are worth. A hush spread through the dining room. I felt the years folding over one another. I had written those words for a boy with no home, never imagining a day would come when my own son would need to hear them. Brandon's face had gone pale. Lauren looked at him, and I could see a question forming in her eyes. Not one she wanted to ask publicly, but one she could not ignore. How could you not know this woman? Marcus returned the note carefully to the sleeve. Mrs. Carter didn't just help me, he said. She helped several of us. People passed through that diner, broken, hungry, ashamed, and she found ways to make them stand straighter. Some became cooks. Some became nurses. One became a school principal. Another owns a bakery in Indianapolis. I know because many of them wrote to her. I shook my head. Not many. Marcus smiled at me. More than you think. Brandon looked up sharply. Wrote to her. My stomach tightened. I knew what he was about to discover, and I was not ready. Marcus noticed my expression. May I? I hesitated. The room waited. I wanted to say no. Not because I was ashamed, but because there are parts of a mother's life that become private simply because no one ever cared enough to ask. Bringing them into the light felt almost indecent. But then I looked at Brandon. His face still carried resistance, but now confusion had joined it. Confusion can become a doorway if pride does not slam it shut. I nodded once. Marcus opened the back section of the portfolio. Inside were copies of letters. Dozens of them. Not all addressed to me directly. Some to Millie's corner. Some to the lady in the red apron. Some old postcards from people whose names I barely remembered until I saw their handwriting. Marcus spread a few on the table. This one is from Deborah Miles, he said, now a nurse in Cleveland. She wrote that Mrs. Carter packed meals for her during nursing school when she was working nights. I remembered Deborah. Thin braids, tired eyes. Always ordered tea because it was cheaper than food. This one is from James Holloway Principal in Dayton. He wrote that Mrs. Carter let him wash dishes after school so he could save for community college. James, always whistling, broke 3 plates his first week. This one is mine. Marcus placed his hand over the final letter. I wrote it after opening my first restaurant. I mailed it to Millie's, but the diner had closed by then. It came back. I kept it. He looked at me. I never stopped looking for a way to send it. The room seemed to blur again at the edges. Brandon's voice came out low. Why didn't you ever tell me any of this? This time, the question was not entirely defensive. There was something else in it. Hurt, maybe. Or fear of what his ignorance said about him. I met his eyes. Because every time I tried to talk about that part of my life, you changed the subject. He looked as if I had slapped him. I didn't. You did, I said, still gently. When I mentioned the diner, you called it sentimental. When I brought food to your office, you told me people didn't do that. When I spoke about old customers, you looked at your phone. And tonight, before we even came here, you asked me not to talk too much about the past. Lauren lowered her gaze. Brandon's mouth opened, then closed. I continued, my voice shaking now, but not breaking. So I learned not to. Not because there was nothing to say, because my own son taught me he did not want to hear it. For once, he had no polished answer. Marcus closed the portfolio. The sound of the leather cover meeting the table was soft, but it felt final. Brandon looked at me, then at the photos, the notebook, the letters. The entire room had become a mirror, and for the first time in years, he could not turn away from his own reflection. But instead of apologizing, he reached for the last piece of pride he had left. I was trying to build something, he said, voice tight. I didn't want to stay poor forever. I nodded slowly. I never asked you to stay poor, Brandon. He looked at me. I only hoped success wouldn't make you ashamed of the woman who helped you reach it. That was when Lauren pushed back her chair and stood. Not dramatically, not angrily, just firmly. And the look she gave Brandon told me that whatever she had thought about him before that dinner, something had changed. Lauren stood so quietly, that had changed. Lauren stood so quietly that for a moment, I thought she was only changing her posture. But then she pushed her chair in with both hands, looked at Brandon, and Dee said, I need to ask you something. For a moment, I thought she was only changing her posture. But then she pushed her chair in with both hands, looked at Brandon, and said, I need to ask you something. Brandon blinked, still caught between the photographs on the table and the room that had turned against his version of the truth. Lauren, not now. Yes, she said. Now. Her voice was not loud. That made it stronger somehow. It cut through the warmth of the dining room, through the clinking glasses and murmured conversations, and settled between us like a judge taking a seat. Brandon glanced around, embarrassed. This is not the place. You had no problem making this the place when you told your mother she didn't belong here. His face tightened. I already said I didn't mean it like that. I looked at him sadly. He had not said that. Not really. He had tried to step around the words without touching them. Lauren looked at me, then at the old articles and letters Marcus had laid out. Evelyn, did Brandon know how much you sacrificed for his education? My stomach dropped. The question came gently, but it went straight to the locked room inside my heart. I had known this moment might come eventually. Maybe not tonight, not under candlelight in a restaurant where strangers still watched us with careful sympathy, but someday. Secrets built from love do not stay buried forever. They grow roots. They push through the floorboards. Brandon frowned. What does that mean? I reached for my handbag on the chair beside me, not because I needed anything from it, but because my hands suddenly needed something familiar to hold. It means, Lauren said, still watching me, someone paid for Northwestern, law school, living expenses. Brandon told me his grandparents helped, and then scholarships covered the rest. Brandon's eyes moved to me. They did, he said quickly. I had aid. You had some aid, I said. The words came out before I could soften them. His face changed. What? I drew a slow breath. You had some aid. Not enough. A deep silence followed. Marcus stood beside me, no longer speaking, but present. Strong, protective, without crowding me. Brandon gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. Mom, what are you talking about? I looked at the table at the photograph of myself in the red apron. That younger woman seemed braver than I felt. When your father died, there wasn't much insurance, I said. Your grandparents helped with what they could, but they were retired. Your scholarships covered part of school, yes. But not everything. Brandon stared at me. Then how did you pay? That question held the innocence of a child and the arrogance of a man who had never had to ask. I swallowed. I worked. He shook his head. I know you worked. No, I said softly. You knew I had jobs. You didn't know what they cost. Lauren sat back down slowly as if her legs had weakened. I continued because stopping would be worse. I worked mornings at Millie's, catering on weekends, cleaning offices at night for almost a year after you left for college. I sold your father's truck. I sold my anniversary bracelet. I sold the china your grandmother gave me because the spring housing bill was due and you needed books. Brandon's face went pale. You sold Dad's truck? You were already gone by then. That truck was not more important than your future. The words came out sharper than I meant, and I saw him flinch. Part of me wanted to apologize. Another part of me, a smaller but stronger part, whispered, let him feel it. For years, he had lived inside a story where his rise had been clean and self-made, where poverty was a childhood inconvenience he had escaped by talent alone, where I was a background figure wiping counters somewhere in Ohio while he built himself from nothing. But no child builds alone. Someone holds the ladder. Someone pays for the bricks. Someone bleeds quietly, so the foundation bleeds quietly, so the foundation looks smooth. Marcus cleared his throat gently. Mrs. Carter also made a decision that changed my life indirectly. I turned to him quickly. Marcus. He looked at me with Apollo guy in his eyes. They need to know. Smooth. Marcus cleared his throat gently. Mrs. Carter also made a decision that changed my life indirectly. I turned to him quickly. Marcus. He looked at me with apology in his eyes. They need to know. Brandon's voice was low. Know what? Marcus glanced toward the chef, David, who stepped forward with a small folder in his hand. I had Tyler make a copy from our archival file. Marcus said, I keep it because it is part of this restaurant's history. I felt suddenly cold. David handed him the folder. Marcus opened it and pulled out a copy of an old contract. I recognized the letterhead immediately. Hawthorne Culinary Group. My fingers tightened around my handbag. Brandon leaned closer. What is that? Marcus placed the paper on the table. The sale agreement for a recipe, he said. Lauren's eyes moved over the document. Brandon looked confused. A recipe, Marcus nodded. A bourbon maple glaze with smoked paprika, brown butter, apple cider vinegar, and a few other things I still won't say out loud because Mrs. Carter would probably scold me. I tried to smile, but my mouth trembled. Brandon looked at me. You sold a recipe? Yes. When? The summer before your junior year at Northwestern. He stared at the paper as if the words were rearranging themselves. Why I did not answer immediately? Because the answer was so simple it hurt. Because your tuition payment was due. Lauren inhaled softly. Brandon's hand slowly moved to the back of a chair, gripping it. No, he said. I nodded. No. He repeated as if denial could rewrite the past. You told me there was a scholarship adjustment. There wasn't. You told me not to worry. I didn't want you to. He looked almost angry now, but beneath it was something raw. You lied to me? Yes, I said. I did. The admission seemed to shock him more than the secret. I looked into his eyes, and I let him see the truth without decoration. I lied because you were 20 years old and carrying enough grief already. Because every time money came up, you looked terrified that you would have to come home. Because your father had told me you were going places, and I was not going to let a bill stop you from getting there. My voice broke slightly at Robert's name. The room blurred again, but I kept speaking. That recipe was mine. It was something I created with my own hands. People loved it. I could have built something from it, maybe. A catering line. A little sauce company. I don't know. But at the time, all I saw was an envelope from the university and my son's dream sitting on the kitchen table. Brandon looked down. Marcus said quietly, "That glaze became the foundation for one of Hawthorne's most profitable seasonal lines. Later versions of it were used in restaurants across 3 states." Brandon's head snapped up. "Wait, are you saying she sold something valuable?" "She sold something very valuable," Marcus said. I shook my head. "It was just a recipe." Marcus turned to me gently. "No, Mrs. Carter. It was intellectual property before anyone in that diner knew to call it that." Brandon pressed his lips together. His eyes shone now, but he fought it. He fought the feeling the same way he had fought poverty, grief. Memory, like tenderness, was a weakness that might drag him back to a place he had escaped. "How much?" he asked. I sighed. "Brandon, how much did they pay you?" "Enough to cover that year." That's not an answer. Grief memory, like tenderness, was a weakness that might drag him back to a place he had escaped. "How much?" he asked. I sighed. "Brandon, how much did they pay you enough to cover that year?" That's not an answer. It was enough. Marcus looked at him. Not enough for what it became. The words were not cruel, just factual. But Brandon seemed to stagger under them. For the first time, I saw him calculating differently. Not what I had cost him, what I had given up. Lauren's voice was barely above a whisper. "You never told anyone." I looked at her. Robert would have known, if he had been alive. The mention of his father changed Brandon's face again. I continued, "After he died, I made decisions alone. Some good, some maybe foolish. But I made them because I loved my son." Brandon looked at me, then not past me, not around me, not through the polished version of the mother he wished he had. At me. The real me. The woman in the old dress. The woman with scarred hands. The woman who had sold a piece of herself and called it luck, so he could sleep peacefully in a dorm room, miles away. His mouth opened. No words came. Then Marcus added, "And that was not the only fund your mother created." I looked at him sharply. "Marcus, no." But he was already looking at Brandon. After the recipe sale, Mrs. Carter put part of the money aside. Later, when I was applying for culinary school, she used some of what remained to help with my application fees and transportation. Brandon looked stunned. "You used my tuition money to help him?" I felt the room stiffen. There it was again, the old selfish reflex sharpened by shock. "No," I said, my voice suddenly firm. "I used my money to help both of you." Brandon blinked. "My money," I repeated. "My labor, my recipe, my sacrifice. You received love from it. So did Marcus. Love is not smaller because it feeds more than one person." Lauren looked at Brandon with unmistakable disappointment. Marcus's eyes stayed steady. Brandon's shoulders dropped just a little, and finally the anger left his face. What remained was worse. A boy realizing the house he lived in had been built from wood his mother cut from her own bones. "I didn't know," he whispered. I nodded. "I know, but I should have." I looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," I said softly. "You should have wanted to." That was the sentence that did it. His eyes filled, and this time he did not look away quickly enough to hide it. But even then, I did not rush to comfort him. I had spent a lifetime protecting Brandon from the cost of being loved. Tonight, I understood that maybe love also needed truth. Lauren stood with the calm of a woman who had reached the end of pretending. For most of that evening, she had been polite, careful. The kind of woman who had been raised to lower her voice in expensive places and never let discomfort wrinkle her face. But now, standing beside the table, with Marcus's old photographs spread between the candles and wine glasses, she looked at Brandon as if she were seeing him without the suit, without the title, without the shine. "Why?" she asked. Brandon stared at her. "Why? What? Why did you hide her?" The question was simple, but it seemed to strike him harder than all the evidence Marcus had shown. "I didn't hide anyone," he said. Lauren's eyes moved to me for a moment, then back to him. "You told me your mother was quiet, private. You said she didn't like fancy restaurants. You said she wouldn't have much in common with my family." Brandon's face tightened. "I was trying to be realistic." "No," Lauren said. "You were preparing me to underestimate her." A silence fell over the table. I felt my heart ache in a new way. Not because Lauren's words were cruel, but because they were accurate. Sometimes truth hurts most when spoken by someone who has only known you for one evening and still sees more clearly than the person you raised. Brandon looked around. "Can we not do this in front of everyone? You had no problem correcting her in front of everyone. That was different." "How?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. Lauren's voice softened, but it did not weaken. "Brandon, when my mother died, I would have given anything for one more dinner with her. One more ordinary conversation. One more chance to ask about her life before me." My breath caught. This was the first time Lauren had mentioned her mother. Brandon looked away. Lauren continued. "She was a nurse, not glamorous, not wealthy. She worked nights. She came home with swollen feet and still made pancakes for me on Saturdays. When I was younger, I used to be embarrassed because she smelled like antiseptic and hospital soap." Her eyes filled, but she held herself steady. Then she got sick. And suddenly, I would have given anything to smell that soap again. The room became very quiet. Even Marcus lowered his gaze. Lauren looked at Brandon with grief and disappointment mingled in her face. "You still have your mother. She is standing right here. She has given you more than you even bothered to ask about. And tonight, you acted as if her life was something you had to apologize for." Brandon's throat moved. "Lauren." "No," she said. "Don't say my name like that. Don't try to soften this." I almost reached for her hand, but stopped myself. This was not my place to interrupt. For years, I had spoken only when there was room left after Brandon's feelings. Tonight, someone else was making room for mine. Brandon turned toward me, then desperation beginning to replace defensiveness. "Mom, I didn't know about the recipe. I didn't know about Marcus. I didn't know all these people wrote letters." I nodded slowly. "I know." His face twisted. Then how was I supposed to know? And there it was again, that small, wounded boy hiding behind the grown man's complaint. He wanted ignorance to absolve him, but ignorance is only innocent when it is not chosen. I took a breath. "You were supposed to ask." He looked stunned. I continued. "Not about money. Not about what I could do for you. About me. About who I was before I became your mother. About what it costs to keep going after your father died. About why my hands shake when I'm tired. About why I still keep a diner apron folded in my cedar chest." His eyes glistened. "I didn't think." "No," I said gently. "You didn't." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. I had dreamed many times of telling Brandon how much he had hurt me. In those dreams, I was eloquent, fierce. Every sentence came out sharp and perfect. But standing there in harbor and sage with strangers pretending not to watch, and my past lying open on white linen, I did not feel fierce. I felt tired. I felt old. I felt like a mother who had finally reached the end of carrying a silence too heavy for one woman. Brandon's voice dropped. I was ashamed. The admission was so quiet, I almost missed it. Lauren's expression softened, but she did not step toward him. Ashamed of what? She asked. He rubbed both hands over his face, then looked at me. Of being poor, he said. Of that house. Of free lunch forms. Of wearing secondhand clothes. Of kids knowing my mom worked at a diner. Of Dad dying and everyone looking at me like I was some sad charity case. His words came faster now, not polished, not controlled. When I got to Northwestern, everyone seemed like they already knew how to belong. Their parents were doctors, executives, judges. They knew restaurants like this. They knew wines and ski trips and summer programs. I didn't know anything. I felt like every time I opened my mouth, people could hear where I came from. His eyes met mine, red and wet. And you were where I came from. I felt the sentence hit me. Not because it was new, because he finally said it plainly. I nodded once, slowly. Yes, I said. I was. His face crumpled a little. I hated myself for it, he whispered. But I still did it. I thought if I became perfect enough, successful enough, nobody would know. And when you showed up with cobbler at my office, or told diner stories, or called people sweetheart, it felt like you were dragging me back. Lauren covered her mouth with her hand, not in shock, but sorrow. Marcus stood very still. I looked at my son, my beautiful, broken, proud son. The boy I had tried so hard to protect from hunger that I had not protected him from shame. Or maybe shame had found him anyway, through classmates, through polished rooms, through a country that teaches people to confuse wealth with worth. But understanding the wound did not erase the injury. Brandon, I said I am sorry you felt small. His eyes lifted with desperate hope. But I am not sorry for the life I gave you. He froze. I am not sorry for that house. It kept you warm. I am not sorry for the diner. It fed us. I am not sorry for my work. It paid for your books, your suits, your apartment, deposits, your exams, your dreams. I am not sorry for saying sweetheart to tired people. I am not sorry for bringing cobbler to your office. That was love. Tears slipped down his cheeks now. I had seen Brandon cry only a handful of times after Robert died. Each time he had turned away quickly. But tonight, he had nowhere to hide. I continued, my voice trembling but clear. What I am sorry for is that I made sacrifice look so quiet. You mistook it for nothing. He let out a shaky breath. Mom. I raised one hand gently. Not yet. The words surprised both of us. All my life, when Brandon hurt, I moved toward him. Fever, heartbreak, school, stress, grief. I came running. But tonight, for the first time, I understood that if I comforted him too quickly, he might never sit long enough with what he had done. I love you, I said. That has never changed. But love does not mean I will let you humiliate me and then soothe you because guilt feels uncomfortable. Lauren's eyes filled again. Brandon wiped his face, ashamed of the tears now, but unable to stop them. I don't know how to fix this, he said. That was the first honest thing he had said all evening. I looked at Marcus's old notebook at the words I had once written to him about starting with one good plate. Then I looked back at my son. You begin by telling the truth, I said. Not to me, to yourself. He nodded barely, and then I continued. You stop treating your mother like evidence of something you survived. His lips parted. You start treating me like someone who survived too. That sentence broke whatever pride he had left. Brandon lowered his head and cried, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet devastation of a man watching his own reflection change. Lauren did not comfort him. Marcus did not shame him. And I stood there, loving him, hurting for him, but no longer willing to disappear so he could feel clean. For the first time in years, my son saw me. Not as a reminder of poverty, not as an old woman in the wrong dress, as a person. And maybe that was the first crack where healing could someday enter. After Brandon's tears came silence. Not the empty kind, not the cold kind. A full silence heavy with all the words that had finally been spoken, and all the words still waiting for courage. I could see my son fighting the instinct to reach for control again. His hands opened and closed at his sides. His shoulders rose with uneven breaths. He looked at me the way a person looks at an old family photograph after learning there was someone important standing just outside the frame. I wanted to touch his face. I wanted to wipe his tears, but I also wanted him to remember the weight of that moment. So I stayed where I was. Marcus seemed to understand. He did not rush us. He simply closed the leather portfolio with careful hands and nodded toward David the chef, who quietly gathered the photographs and documents as if they were sacred things. Then Marcus turned to me. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice soft, "would you still allow us to cook for you?" The question sounded different now. Not like an offer from a successful man to an old mentor, but like a door opening out of pain. I glanced at Brandon. His eyes were still wet. He looked ashamed, but not angry anymore. Lauren stood a little apart from him, her expression guarded, as if she had not decided yet whether the man before her was the man she thought she knew. "I don't want anyone punished tonight," I said. Marcus gave a small smile. "This is not punishment." I looked at the tables around us, at the strangers who had become witnesses to my most private wound. "I don't want a spectacle either." "Then no spectacle," he said. "Just respect." That word settled over me. Respect. How strange that a woman could cook thousands of meals, raise a son alone, hold grief in one hand and a spatula in the other, and still feel startled when someone offered respect, as if it belonged to her naturally. Before I could answer, David stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, "our whole kitchen would be honored if you came back for a few minutes." I blinked. "The whole kitchen?" He smiled a little embarrassed. "Chef Marcus has told us about you for years. Most of us thought you were almost, well, I don't want to say legend." Marcus chuckled. "Go ahead. Say it." David's smile widened. "A legend?" I shook my head, overcome. "Oh, I'm no legend." Marcus looked at me gently. "That's the thing about legends. They rarely believe they are one." A warmth moved through the room again. Lauren came closer then. "Evelyn," she said, "would it be all right if I came too?" Brandon looked at her quickly. She did not ask him. She asked me. That mattered. "Yes," I said. "Of course." Then I looked at Brandon. He stood very still, waiting for an invitation he did not seem to believe he deserved. I let the moment stretch, not to hurt him, but to let him understand that being included was not something he could assume after making me feel unwanted. Finally, I said, "You may come too, Brandon, if you come quietly." His lips parted. He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." The word almost made me cry. Not because it was formal, but because there was humility in it. Real humility, not the polished politeness he used in courtrooms and client dinners. Marcus offered me his arm again, but this time I shook my head gently. "I can walk," he smiled. "I know." And I did. I walked through the dining room of Harbor and Sage with my head lifted. Not high with pride exactly. Higher with memory, with dignity, with every younger version of myself walking beside me. The widow, the cook, the mother, the woman counting dollars at the kitchen table, the woman writing encouragement inside a cheap notebook for a hungry boy. The kitchen doors swung open. Heat met me first. Real heat. Not the candle-soft warmth of the dining room, but the living heat of work. Steam, flame butter, garlic herbs, bruised under knives, metal pans singing against burners. For the first time that evening, I breathed deeply. This, I understood. This was not foreign to me. The kitchen staff stopped. Line, cooks, prep, cooks, dishwashers, pastry assistants, servers, passing through with trays. All of them turned. For a heartbeat, I felt foolish standing there in my navy dress and old shoes. Then Tyler began clapping again. This time, the applause filled the kitchen. Not polite applause. Kitchen applause. Sharp, loud, alive. Hands that had chopped and scrubbed and carried and burned and built something clapped for mine. I covered my mouth. David stepped forwards. "Welcome to the heart of the house, Mrs. Carter." The heart of the house. I had not heard a kitchen described that way in years. At Millie's corner, the kitchen had been cramped and loud with cracked tiles and a back door that stuck in humid weather. But it had been a heart, too, imperfect, overworked, stubbornly beating. Marcus led us to a stainless steel prep table near the back where someone had laid out a clean cutting board. A small bowl of cherries, sprigs of thyme, butter vinegar, and a little saucepan. I looked at the ingredients. Then I looked at him. He grinned like the 17-year-old boy I remembered. "The duck sauce," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Marcus." "What?" "You brought me back here to fix your sauce." A ripple of laughter moved through the staff. He held up both hands. "Only if you feel moved to rescue us." David looked mortified and amused at once. "For the record, ma'am, that batch went out before I checked it." I laughed then. A real laugh. The kind that came from someplace I thought had closed for the evening. "It wasn't ruined," I said. "Just rushed." Marcus's eyes softened. "Flavor comes from patience," I pointed at him. "Don't use my own words to charm me." The staff laughed again. For the first time all night, Brandon made a sound that might have been a laugh too, though it broke halfway through. When I glanced at him, he was watching me with an expression I had not seen in years. Wonder. Not embarrassment. Not impatience. Wonder. Marcus handed me a spoon. My hand trembled as I took it. I hated that. Even in that honored moment, age reminded me it had come along too. But then David quietly slid a folded towel beneath the bowl to steady it, not making a fuss, not drawing attention. Kindness without humiliation. Marcus had learned well. I stepped closer to the stove. "All right," I said. "First lower the heat." David moved quickly. "The butter goes last," I continued. "And it doesn't want to be bullied. It wants to be invited." Someone near the dish station whispered, "That's going on the wall." I smiled. I added vinegar to the cherries, stirred slowly. Watched the sauce tighten and shine. The room seemed to lean in. I could feel Brandon behind me, Lauren beside him, Marcus at my shoulder, still as a student. As the butter melted in the sauce, became glossy and smooth, no longer split, no longer hurried into failure. "See," I said. "Gentle heat." David dipped a clean spoon, tasted, and closed his eyes. Well, he said I have been humbled twice tonight. Laughter filled the kitchen. Marcus tasted next. For a second, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "There she is." I knew he did not mean only the sauce. I blinked quickly. Marcus turned to the staff. "Tonight's staff meal gets this version." A cheer went up, and I shook my head. "You are all making too much of an old woman stirring cherries." "No," Lauren said quietly behind me. I turned. Her eyes shone. "We're making enough of you for once." The kitchen went quiet again. Brandon looked down, tears returning. Marcus cleared his throat and reached for a small menu card from the prep table. It was blank except for the restaurant logo at the top. "I had planned to ask you this privately someday," he said. "But since fate brought you here tonight, I would like to ask now." I looked at him warily. Ask what he placed the card in front of me. "I want to create a special menu at Harbor and Sage. One night, a month at first. Comfort food refined, but not stripped of its soul. Recipes inspired by the woman who taught me that good food can give people their dignity back." My heart began pounding. "I want to call it Evelyn's Table." The room disappeared for a moment. All I saw was that little diner sign in my memory. No strangers. I gripped the edge of the prep table. "Marcus, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Tyler whispered from across the kitchen. Everyone laughed softly, but their faces were earnest. I looked at Brandon. He was staring at the blank card as if my name printed there had more weight than any law degree on his wall. For years, he had tried to remove me from the rooms he wanted to enter. Now someone wanted to put my name on the table. I touched the card with one finger. "I don't want this to be about revenge," I said. Marcus nodded. "It won't be. I don't want my son humiliated." Brandon looked up, startled. Even after everything, the mother in me still spoke. Marcus's voice so faddened. "Then it will be about honor." "I don't want my son humiliated." Brandon looked up, startled. Even after everything, the mother in me still spoke. Marcus's voice softened. "Then it will be about honor." Honor. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness, I saw Robert smiling beside a hospital bed, holding our newborn son. This boy is going to go places, Evie. Yes, Robert, I thought. He did. But maybe tonight, I was going somewhere too. I opened my eyes. "All right," I whispered. "Evelyn's Table." The kitchen erupted, and in the middle of the applause, I did not look away this time. That night did not end with Brandon magically becoming a different man. I wish life worked that way. I wish one painful truth, one public humbling, one kitchen full of applause could wash years of pride from a person's heart. But people are not sauces. You cannot lower the heat, add butter slowly, and expect everything broken to come smooth again in minutes. After the kitchen celebrated the idea of Evelyn's Table, Marcus insisted we sit for a proper meal. Not in the center of the dining room where everyone could keep watching us, but at a small table near the back, close enough to the kitchen that I could still hear the rhythm of pans and voices. The food they brought out was beautiful, but not precious. A bowl of chicken and dumplings, elevated but still comforting. Cornbread with honey butter. Greens touched with vinegar. A small plate of duck with the corrected cherry sauce, glossy, now patient now. Marcus sat with us for a few minutes, then left us alone. Lauren sat across from me. Brandon sat beside her, but not close enough to touch. I noticed that. I think he noticed it too. For several minutes, no one said much. Lauren tasted the dumplings and smiled faintly. "This feels like something my mother would have loved." I said, "Then I'm glad it's here." Brandon looked at his bowl, but did not eat. I watched him for a while before speaking. You should try it before it gets cold. He let out a small, broken laugh. That sounds like you. It is me. His face changed at that. Maybe he heard what I meant. I was not going to disappear into some grand symbolic version of myself. I was still his mother. Still the woman who cared whether he ate. But I was also no longer willing to be reduced to that care. He picked up his spoon. After dinner, Lauren excused herself to call a ride. She said it gently, but the meaning was clear. She needed space from Brandon. He stood as if he wanted to follow her, but she shook her head. I'll meet you outside in a few minutes, she said. He nodded, wounded but quiet. When she left, the table felt larger. Brandon looked at me and whispered, Mom, can we talk? I folded my hands in my lap. Yes. He swallowed. Privately, I looked toward the hallway near the kitchen. There's a quiet place by the back. We walked together through the narrow corridor behind the dining room. It smelled of coffee lemons and old brick. Near the service entrance, there was a small bench under a framed black and white photo of Harbor and Sage before it became famous. I sat first. Brandon remained standing for a moment, then sat beside me, leaving a careful space between us. He looked younger there. Without the table, without Lauren, without Marcus's documents, he looked like the boy who used to sit on the back steps after school when something had gone wrong, and he did not know how to say it. I'm sorry, he said. The words came quickly, too quickly. I turned my head. For what? He blinked. For tonight. What part of tonight? He looked pained. All of it. That is a beginning, but it is not an answer. His eyes dropped. I knew I was making it hard for him. Part of me wanted to let the apology stand, to accept the smallest version, because at least it was something. But another part of me, the part that had stood in that kitchen with my name on a menu card, knew that vague apologies were blankets people threw over specific wounds. I'm sorry I embarrassed you, he said finally. I waited. I'm sorry I said you didn't belong there. I nodded. His voice trembled. I'm sorry I acted like your work was beneath me. That one matters, I said. He rubbed his hands together, staring at the floor. I don't know why I became like this. I think you do. He looked at me. You told us at the table, I said. You were ashamed of being poor. You thought if you polished yourself enough, no one would see where you came from. His mouth tightened. It sounds awful when you say it. It was awful when you lived it. He closed his eyes. I softened my voice. But shame explains harm. It does not excuse it. He nodded, tears gathering again. I know. I studied him carefully. Do you? He looked at me then, and I saw the fight rise again. Not anger at me, but anger at himself. Mom, I'm trying. I know. But trying tonight is not the same as changing tomorrow. He sat back as if the words had weight. For years, Brandon had been rewarded for speaking well. Professors praised his arguments. Judges respected his clarity. Clients paid for his confidence. He had learned that words could open doors. But this door would not open for words alone. I'll do better, he said. How he looked lost. I don't know yet. That is more honest. A tired little smile crossed his face and disappeared. I took a breath. Brandon, I am not cutting you out of my life. His shoulders loosened with visible relief. But I am changing the terms of how you may stand in it. The relief froze. What does that mean? It means you do not get to correct me like I am a child. You do not get to introduce me as if I am an obligation. You do not get to invite me somewhere and then warn me not to be myself." His face crumpled. "It means if you are embarrassed by my house, my clothes, my stories, my old work, or the way I love people, then you do not get access to the soft parts of me." He whispered, "Mom." "No. Listen." He went still. "I spent years making myself smaller so you could feel comfortable. I thought that was love. Maybe sometimes it was, but sometimes it was fear. Fear that if I asked for too much, you would visit less, call less, need me less." My throat tightened. "And the truth is, you already did." He looked away ashamed. I continued. "So now I am asking, not begging, asking. If you want a relationship with me, you will learn who I am, not just who I was to you. Who I am." He nodded slowly. "You will come to my house without treating it like a museum of things you escaped." Another nod. "You will ask about your father without changing the subject." His lips pressed together. "That's hard." "I know. I miss him." "So do I." For the first time in years, we sat together inside Robert's absence instead of walking around it. Brandon wiped his face with both hands. "I think I blamed you a little." I went still. He shook his head quickly. "Not rationally. I know you didn't do anything, but after Dad died, you kept going. You worked, you cooked, you paid bills, you made everything function. I was falling apart inside, and you looked strong." A sad breath left me. I was not strong every minute. You never let me see. I was trying to protect you. I know. He looked at me, but I think part of me resented that you could keep standing when I felt like I couldn't. The confession hurt, but it also opened something. "I cried in the laundry room," I said. He stared at me, and in the car, and sometimes in the freezer at Millie's because nobody could hear me over the fan. His face folded with grief. "I didn't know." "No," I said. "You were a child. That part was not yours to carry. But I carried something anyway." "Yes," I whispered. "You did." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Brandon said, "I want to know about him, about you, about the diner, all of it." I looked at him carefully, searching for performance. I found shame. I found fear. But beneath it, I found the beginning of sincerity. "Then you can start next Sunday," I said. He blinked. "Next Sunday. Come for lunch. At my house. You'll make chicken and dumplings." His eyes filled again. "I'd like that. There is one more thing. Anything." I almost smiled. "Do not say anything too quickly. You don't know what anything costs yet." He nodded, accepting the correction. "One day you may apologize publicly if you choose to. But I do not want a performance. I do not want tears used as payment. I want action." "What kind of action?" "Respect Lauren enough to tell her the truth about who you are. Respect yourself enough to stop pretending poverty is a stain. And respect me enough to never again make me earn a place beside you." He stared at the floor. Then slowly, he reached for my hand. He did not grab it like a child. He offered his hand like a question. I looked at it. Then I placed mine in his. His fingers closed carefully around my scarred knuckles. For the first time that night, I let myself squeeze back. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a door left unlocked. The Sunday after Harbor and Sage Brandon came to my house 20 minutes early. That alone told me something had shifted. For years, when he visited, He arrived late with an excuse already folded neatly in his mouth. Traffic, work, a call with a client, a deadline he could not ignore. He would step into my little house as if time inside it counted differently, as if minutes spent with me were something he could borrow from the edge of a more important life. But that Sunday, I looked through the kitchen window and saw his car pull up before noon. For a moment, I simply stood there with my hand on the curtain. He got out slowly, holding a paper grocery bag against his chest. He wore jeans and a plain sweater instead of a suit. No shiny watch, no sharp city armor. Just my son standing on the sidewalk in front of the house where he had grown up looking as nervous as a boy on the first day of school. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door before he could knock. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hi, Brandon." He glanced down at the bag. "I brought apples. I wasn't sure if I should bring anything, but I remembered you used to say nobody should come to lunch empty-handed." The memory touched me, but I kept my face calm. "That was your grandmother's rule before it was mine." He nodded. "I didn't know that. There's a lot you don't know." He lowered his eyes. "I know." I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked into the house carefully, like someone entering a church after years away. His eyes moved over the old entry table, the framed photos, the scuffed baseboards, the worn armchair Robert used to sit in. I watched him waiting for the old tension to appear, the slight tightening of his mouth, the quick glance that said this place embarrassed him. It did not come. Instead, he stopped in front of a photograph on the wall. He was 8 in it, missing a front tooth, sitting on Robert's shoulders at the county fair. I stood beside them in a yellow blouse, laughing at something outside the frame. "I forgot this picture," he said. "You love that fair. Dad bought me a wooden snake. And you scared Mrs. Haskell with it at church the next morning." A real smile crossed his face. "I got in so much trouble. You deserved it." He laughed softly, and for a second the room warmed with something I thought we had lost. Then his eyes went to the hallway. "Can I see it?" "See what the apron?" I knew immediately what he meant. The red diner apron. I had mentioned it at Harbor and Sage without thinking, the one I kept folded in my cedar chest. I almost said no, not because I wanted to hide it, but because the apron had become mine in a private way. A witness to years Brandon had dismissed. Letting him see it felt like letting him into a room he had not earned yet. But healing cannot happen if every door stays locked. "In the bedroom," I said. He followed me down the hall. I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. The scent of wood lavender sachets and old fabric rose up. Beneath a folded quilt and Robert's winter scarf lay the apron faded now, the red softened by decades of washing. One pocket had a small tear I never fixed. Near the hem was a tiny dark mark from coffee that would not come out. I lifted it carefully. Brandon did not reach for it. He asked, "May I?" That question mattered too. I placed it in his hands. He held it as if it weighed more than cloth. "I remember this," he whispered. "You used to hide crayons in that pocket?" His thumb brushed the torn seam. "I used to think you were gone so much because you liked the diner more than home." The confession surprised me. I sat slowly on the edge of the bed. "Oh, Brandon." He looked at me with shame. "I know. It sounds childish. You were a child, but I carried it too long." I nodded. "Yes, you did." He folded the apron gently and handed it back. "I'm sorry I made your work the enemy." I looked at him, and this time the apology felt less like a sentence he had prepared and more like a truth he had sat with alone. "Thank you," I said. We cooked lunch together. That had not been my plan. I intended to make chicken and dumplings myself, while he sat at the table, maybe asked questions, maybe listened. But when I started flouring the chicken, Brandon stood awkwardly near the counter and said, "Can I help?" I handed him celery. He chopped too slowly and unevenly. At first, I almost took the knife from him, but I stopped myself. He was a beginner in more ways than one. "Curl your fingers," I said. He adjusted. "Like this." "Better." He looked at the cutting board. "Did you teach Marcus like this?" "Yes. Though he was worse." Brandon smiled faintly. "Good." We moved around the kitchen together with careful politeness at first. Then little by little, the rhythm found us. I stirred broth. He rolled dumpling dough badly, then laughed when half of it stuck to his fingers. I told him flour was not wallpaper paste. He said law school had not prepared him for dumplings. I told him law school had failed him. He laughed again. The sound loosened something in me. Over lunch, he asked about Robert. Not the polished questions people ask because they know they should, but real ones. What was Dad like before I was born? Did he want more children? What scared him? What made him laugh? I answered slowly, carefully. Some memories came easily. Others hurt coming out. I told him Robert sang off key in the shower. That he wanted a daughter, but was so proud of Brandon, he pretended one child had always been the plan. That he worried constantly about money, but hid it by fixing things around the house. That the night Brandon was born, he stood at the nursery window and cried so hard, a nurse brought him tissues. Brandon listened with his head bowed. At one point, he whispered, "I thought if I didn't talk about him, it meant I had moved on." "No," I said. "Sometimes it only means grief is sitting in the dark getting bigger." He nodded, wiping his eyes. That afternoon became the first of many small beginnings. He came the next Sunday too, and the one after that. Sometimes Lauren came with him. Sometimes she did not. Their relationship was strained after the restaurant, and I could see Brandon wanted me to ask whether she would forgive him. I did not. That was not mine to repair. But Lauren called me one evening on her own. "Evelyn," she said, "Marcus invited me to the launch of Evelyn's table. I wanted to ask if you would be comfortable with me coming." "Of course, dear." She was quiet for a moment. "Brandon and I are taking things slowly." "I understand. I care about him. But I need to see who he becomes after shame, not who he performs as after being caught." I closed my eyes. "That is wise." She exhaled softly. "I hope that doesn't hurt you." "It doesn't. It tells me you know your worth." She came to the launch. 2 weeks before the event, Marcus called to tell me the first Evelyn's table night had sold out in less than 48 hours. "Sold out," I said, sitting at my kitchen table with the phone pressed to my ear. "Completely. Marcus, people don't even know me. They know the story." I frowned. "What story?" He hesitated. "A food columnist heard about the menu. I didn't share anything private, I promise. I only told them Evelyn's table honors the woman who taught me that food and dignity belong together." The words made me silent. "Mrs. Carter, I'm here. Are you angry?" "No," I said. "I'm scared." He softened. "You don't have to make a speech if you don't want to." But I knew I did. Not for Marcus. Not for the guests. Not even for Brandon. For the younger woman in the red apron who had spent her life giving away pieces of herself and calling it ordinary. The night of the launch, I wore the navy dress again. This time, I did not wonder whether it was appropriate. I pinned Robert's gold band beneath the collar, close to my heart. I touched the mirror and whispered, "Come with me again." When I arrived at Harbor and Sage, my name was printed on a small card near the entrance. Evelyn's table. I stood there looking at it until Marcus came to my side. "Ready?" he asked. "No." He smiled. "Good. Honest answer." Inside the restaurant glowed with warmth. Not cold elegance this time, but something softer. On every table was a small card with a simple sentence, "No strangers at this table." My breath caught. Marcus had remembered. Guests turned as I entered. Some smiled, some clapped gently. The kitchen staff stood near the open doorway, watching like family. And then I saw Brandon. He stood near the back, not in the center, not performing, just waiting. Lauren stood a few feet beside him, close, but not touching. Brandon's eyes met mine. He placed one hand over his heart. No speech, no display, just a quiet promise from across the room. For the first time, I believed he understood that this night was not about his shame. It was about my name finally being spoken with honor. Healing did not arrive like thunder. It came quietly. It came in Sunday lunches, where Brandon showed up early and stayed after the dishes were done. It came in phone calls that no longer began with, "I only have a minute, Mom," but with, "How are you really doing today?" It came in the way he started asking before correcting me, listening before explaining, and sitting in silence when silence was what the moment needed. The first time he took me to dinner after Evelyn's table, he did not choose the most expensive restaurant in Chicago. He chose a small family-owned place in Oak Park, with red vinyl booths, paper placemats, and a waitress who called everyone honey. When she called Brandon honey, he smiled instead of stiffening. That was when I knew something real had begun. We sat across from each other under warm lights with meatloaf on my plate and pot roast on his. No cameras, no applause, no Marcus, no public confession waiting in the wings. Just a mother and son trying to learn how to be truthful without bleeding all over the table. "I used to hate places like this," Brandon admitted, looking around. "I know." He smiled sadly. "You're not going to make that easier for me, are you?" "No." "Good," he said. "I don't think you should." That was new too. There is a kind of apology that wants comfort and a kind that accepts consequence. Brandon was learning the second one. Lauren remained part of our lives, but carefully. She did not rush back into Brandon's arms because he had cried in public. I respected her for that. She came to my house for lunch sometimes, bringing flowers from a little market near her apartment. She asked about Robert, about Millie's Corner, about the old recipes. She helped me write down measurements I had carried in my hands for decades. "That much flour?" she would ask. "Enough until it feels right." She would laugh. "Evelyn, that is not a measurement. It is if your hands are paying attention." Brandon started learning too. At first, he was terrible. He overworked biscuit dough until it came out hard as doorstops. He salted greens like he was punishing them. He burned onions twice because he kept checking work emails near the stove. The second time I took his phone, placed it in a kitchen drawer and said, "If you want to cook with me, be here with me." He looked embarrassed. Then he nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Weeks turned into months. Evelyn's table became more than I expected. Marcus kept it once a month at first, then twice when reservations filled too quickly. I did not become a celebrity, not in the way people use that word now. I did not want interviews every week or my face on billboards. But sometimes strangers wrote letters. Older women, widows, mothers whose children had forgotten their stories. Young cooks who said the line, "No strangers at this table," made them remember why they entered kitchens in the first place. Marcus saved every letter for me in a wooden box. The first time he handed it to me, I cried. Again with the crying, he teased gently. "You keep bringing me pieces of my life I didn't know survived," I said. His face softened. "Then you'll keep bringing them." Brandon came to one Evelyn's table night without Lauren. He sat alone near the back, exactly where he had stood during his apology. I noticed he spoke kindly to the waiter. I noticed he did not introduce himself by his job. I noticed when an older woman at the next table asked if he was related to me, he smiled and said, "I'm her son," with no hesitation, no shrinking, no polishing. After the meal, he found me near the kitchen. "Mom," he said I did something. My heart tightened out of old habit. "What?" He pulled an envelope from his coat. Inside was a copy of paperwork from his law firm. He had taken on pro bono cases for restaurant workers dealing with wage theft and unfair treatment. Not as a publicity gesture, not under the firm's charity banner, quietly after hours. "I can't undo what I thought about your work," he said, "but I can honor it better now." I held the papers for a long moment. "That is action," I said. His eyes filled, but he smiled. "I hoped you'd say that." One Sunday, near the end of spring, Brandon came over with Lauren. The air smelled of rain and lilacs. We cooked chicken and dumplings, but this time I let Brandon handle the dough. He rolled it carefully slow enough to make me impatient. "Too slow?" he asked. "No," I said. "Patient." He grinned. "Flavor comes from patience." I pointed my spoon at him. "Don't get smug." Lauren laughed, and for a moment the kitchen filled with something I had not felt since before Robert died, a future. Not the old future. Not the one I had planned. Life does not return what it takes in the same shape. But sometimes, if grace is kind, it gives you something new enough to be real. After lunch, Brandon asked if he could see Robert's old toolbox. We found it in the garage, dusty under a shelf. He opened it like a treasure chest. Inside were wrenches, nails, a tape measure, an old receipt, and a pencil sharpened with a pocket knife. Brandon held the pencil in his palm. "I spent so many years trying not to be from here," he said. "Now I wish I had paid more attention." "You can start now." He looked at me. "Is it too late?" I thought about that. At 68, you learn that some things do become too late. Some apologies never arrive. Some tables stay empty. Some people die before we ask the questions we should have asked. But not everything. "No," I said. "Not if you mean it with your life." He nodded slowly. "I do." That evening, after Lauren left and Brandon was getting ready to drive back to Chicago, he paused at the door. "Mom?" "Yes." "Would you ever let me take you back to Harbor and Sage, just us? Not for an event. Not for Lauren. Not to prove anything." I looked at him, remembering the first night. The shame. The glass door. The sentence that had nearly broken me. Then I looked at the man standing before me now. Not perfect. Not fully healed. But trying with his hands, his time, his attention. "Yes," I said. "But this time, I choose what I wear." He laughed softly. "Deal." A month later, we returned. I wore my navy dress again, not because I had to prove it belonged there, but because I did. Marcus greeted us at the door, hugged me, shook Brandon's hand, and led us to a quiet table near the window. There was no scene, no dramatic reveal, just dinner. When the waiter came, Brandon looked at me first. "Mom," he said, "what do you recommend?" Such a simple question, but it held years inside it. I looked at the menu, then at my son. "The duck," I said, "if they didn't rush the sauce." The waiter laughed. Marcus, passing nearby, called out, "We never rush that sauce anymore." And there it was. A table, a repaired beginning, a son learning that dignity is not something money gives you, a mother learning that forgiveness does not mean becoming small again. As we ate, Brandon asked me about Millie's Corner, and this time I told him everything. The truckers, the nurses, the lonely Christmas mornings, Marcus with his crooked pie, his father eating meatloaf at midnight after fixing the furnace. The boy Brandon used to be swinging his legs at the counter, telling anyone who would listen that his mama made the best food in Ohio. He listened, really listened, and when I finished, he reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm proud of where I come from," he said. I did not answer right away. I simply held his hand and looked around the room that had once made me feel like I did not belong. Then I smiled. "You should be," I said. "It fed you."